What's up, everyone? I'm Jackie.
And I'm Lindsay.
And we are Women Leaders in Sports Medicine.
Here to help you grow your game and own your game.
Today we have the great fortune of chatting with Dr. Amy Arundale, physical therapist with the Brooklyn Nets. We discuss her maybe unconventional pathway of working in soccer with the Carolina Railhawks and then to the NBA, importance of experiencing life as well as pursuing your passion, and how to work with a sport that maybe you aren't necessarily familiar with. As always, thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy listening in.
Hi, everyone. We have another stellar guest with us today, Dr. Amy Arundale. Amy, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on. I'm, again, very excited to get into your wealth of experiences, and I think our viewers and listeners will also appreciate everything you have to share. So that being said, let's jump right in. What has this time off been like for you?
It's been an adventure. It's definitely been different. I think, for everybody, it's been, getting used to kind of what's hopefully a temporary new normal, but a new normal for sure. So, figuring out like how you deal with various issues, how you kind of handle your own, mental well-being, physical well-being, while kind of being cooped up a little bit has definitely been a challenge and an interesting one.
Yeah, I can relate to that in a society where, or even in a field where we're always on the go, we're always busy. We're kind of forced to not be busy for once.
Yeah.
So, but that's good. It's been an adventure for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to look at it, at least in my perspective, is that it's a new experience, and hopefully it's one in our lifetimes we don't experience again. But I mean, who knows? So take it as it comes.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully things calm down and we get back to what we love to do. At the same time, we all, as physical therapists or strength and conditioning coaches or whatever it may be, we are on a grind on a regular, and so it's kind of a forced stop. Which was kind of nice too. I just found myself like reading a lot more research than I was doing before, and seeking out new adventures. So it's some silver linings in it too, I suppose.
In some ways I found myself even more busy. Because suddenly all those projects that have been on the back burner, I'm like, ooh, I can get to work on this a little bit, and then something else will come up and it'll take over, or like something from work will come back through, and it's like, dang it, like I want to work on this. I can't quite yet.
Yeah, for sure. So starting to kind of get into the meat of the podcast, I'd love to hear, what is your why for getting into physical therapy or sports or whatever it may be under like what you're working in right now?
Yeah, so I grew up playing soccer. And from when I was little, I grew up wanting to play for the U.S. women's national team. I'm the generation that watched the 99ers, win the World Cup, and wanted to be and play with Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain and Julie Foudy and Christine Lilly. Like, that was my kind of generation of female heroes. Obviously came to the realization that I wasn't that good and was not going to play at that level. But that's been my passion since I was little. And so, from that realization was, how do I make a career, close to soccer, close to sport. So, coming through high school, into college, I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. So, great community to grow up in, but it didn't really give me exposure to all the things that went into professional or elite sport. So I kind of went to college thinking that if I was going to work in sport or in soccer, my options were to coach soccer, which I started doing. I worked my way through some of the coaching licenses, kind of physical therapy or orthopedic surgery. I didn't really know about a lot of things in between. I think sports science would have been awesome, but I didn't really know it was a thing. Non-operative sports medicine what wasn't really on my radar. So those were kind of the three paths that I thought were kind of my way into building a career around soccer. So went off to college, worked in our training room while I was there. So I got a ton of training room hours, but no athletic training degree to show for it because I went to a pretty small school. So no ATC program, but was pushed pretty heavily towards med school because that was a big focus of our bio department. So decided that coaching was probably not for me. I felt like I needed a little bit more push than I would get coaching, as well as, there's not a lot of job stability in coaching.
Yeah.
Which is ironic since now I work in professional sport, which also doesn't have a ton of job stability.
Full circles, I suppose.
Yeah. So that kind of narrowed it to PT, and in my, at the time for me, PT and orthopedic surgery, and kind of thinking about time that I'd spent volunteering and observing with the ortho that kind of was our family ortho at home who'd done surgery on my knee, as well as, my PTs that I'd spent time with growing up. Really, well, I realized I really like conscious people. And as an orthopedic surgeon, you spend a lot of time with unconscious people. And the relationships that you really got to build with someone as a physical therapist was really, I thought, really impactful. And I thought really resonated with me a lot more than, the time that a lot of surgeons get, because it's pretty fast. And even though my orthopedic surgeon at home was pretty amazing, and when it was a decision on was I going to have meniscal surgery, he spent a really long time with me. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized a lot of his visits were maybe 5 minutes tops. And so that was a kind of big deciding factor for me, was the relationships that I could build, kind of how special that was when you're working with someone who's injured or in pain and able to kind of help bring them back into what they want to be doing and achieving those goals. So that was kind of my deciding or reasoning for PT. So
yeah, there's a couple cool things in your why. One, you stayed true to your childhood self in a way, just loving soccer and sports and wanting to be a part of it so bad. And, as all of us, when we're younger, we think that we can, rule the world and we're going to play professional sport, but you still kind of stuck true to that path, and you ended up working with soccer later in life anyway. So I thought that's really fun. And then it's hilarious that you're I want to work with conscious people. I don't think I've had anyone say that to me, but I think it comes back to something that's really unique in sports medicine on, the PT side or SNC or AT or whatever it may be. And that's being able to actually create relationships with people and seeing what they're motivated by and what they tick by and all that type of stuff. So that's really cool. And then the other thing is that you kind of created little opportunities in different areas of sport in a very unique way, right? You were in the athletic training room, you were a coach. And so I'm sure as we kind of get into this and start talking about your journey, your experience in those sectors has given you some insight maybe into how to work as a unit, being, a younger coach yourself and being in the AT room, and then ultimately ending your way over to PT. So very cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I think one thing you touched on too, you started out talking about how you were an athlete. And I was just having this conversation with a colleague the other day, but how working in this field, you have to have an athlete's mentality. I don't know if you necessarily want to call it an elitist mentality. I don't know if that's too putting it in a box, but I love that you touched on that too. And like Jackie said, you took different experiences in different parts to help inform your decision and end up where you are today. So let's touch on that a little bit. So currently you're with the Nets. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Can you tell us, and again, you dove into this a little bit with your why, but can you tell us a little more about your journey on how you got to where you are now? Because everyone, or at least a lot of mentees that Jackie and I speak with are look at that and they're like, oh, that's so awesome. And then the next question is, well, how did they get there? Like, what did they do? So if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so mine's not your normal path.
Even better.
Love it.
Yeah.
It's
Tell me more.
a little unique for particularly at least for working in kind of elite sport. It's maybe a little bit more unique. So I went to Duke for PT school. Well, actually, taking a step back. So it was really my junior year of college that I decided PT was the route I was going to go. With that, needed a few more prereqs. So for PT school, I needed a stats class. I needed 2 semesters of anatomy and physiology. I'd finished off physics, but I kind of decided that during my senior year, rather than really pushing to get those done, I went to a small liberal arts college, and there were so many things that I kind of wanted to take advantage of while I was there. That kind of my decision making was, why don't I take advantage of the opportunities that I have here at Haverford this year. 4 years of undergrad has been pretty intense. Been pretty rigorous. A year off of and a kind of a year of life experience isn't necessarily a bad thing. And kind of so taking a break might be good. So I applied to a couple different fellowships, and I got one. So I spent a year working in a private school in London as their head of women's soccer. So I coached their like high school team. I oversaw some of their like middle school and elementary school teams, and then I was like an assistant teacher. So I helped teach their bio and chemistry and classes to like 7th and 11th graders, and then had a like 9th grade homeroom or 8th grade, essentially an 8th grade homeroom class. Yeah. So kind of took that year off, which was it was really good. Took a little bit of a break before I went to Duke for PT school. So I did a little bit more did more coaching, got a little life experience under my belt, which was good in PT school to kind of put PT school in a frame of reference.
Oh, for sure.
That it is
Yeah.
just PT school. It's not my entire life.
Exactly.
Yeah. I hate to interrupt you there, but I think that's a great point. Jackie and I both went right into PT school. So I think we both have the mindset of, we're going to get through this. Like, of course, why would this not be your next step? And I think sometimes individuals don't realize how fast you have to grow up.
Yeah.
So being 21 and 22 years old, you grow up very fast. So anyway, continue. I think that's great. You took a year off, and I hope some listeners are now, thinking a little differently about that. But continue.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a push to kind of get on with it and to get out into the workforce and to keep going. And I think the contrast to that is then the burnout that you get. I mean, PT school's tough. And the burnout, especially in that like first and second semester where you're kind of adjusting to it, you're getting a ton of information. It is real. And so I'm really glad that I took that time off. And I think in a lot of ways it's, I kind of wish more people got encouraged to do it. That it's okay to take that time off, and it doesn't look badly. In fact, a lot of schools look really favorably on it because that's experience that you can then take into a clinic. And, maybe you were delivering mail, or, maybe you're working as like a CNA, whatever it is that you're doing for that year. Maybe you're coaching. That's experience that when you're working with somebody might help you relate to them. And so I think there's a lot of real value to it in that regard. But yeah, so I went to Duke, did a lot of volunteering while I was at Duke with some of the soccer clubs around the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area, and then took a job out of school, splitting my time with a sports injury clinic, or kind of a sports clinic where I saw mostly endurance athletes in the mornings. down near Chapel Hill. And then my afternoons were based at a big youth soccer club in North Raleigh. So I was really lucky to have some pretty amazing mentorship. Got I was, as a first job, I couldn't have asked for a better one. But had made the decision to take that job over doing a sports residency, because I knew I was going to get a lot of mentorship. I knew I could get some of the didactic portions of what I'd get in a residency through some like networking connections and actually one of my previous clinical sites. And I knew I could get a lot of soccer experience, which is kind of what I wanted. So rather than kind of being more of a sports generalist, for me, it was an opportunity to kind of be a soccer specialist, which is kind of what I wanted to do. So worked there for a couple years and then decided to go and do a PhD at the University of Delaware in 2013. So I went and studied primary and secondary ACL injury prevention, and returned to sport for 4 years in Delaware.
Soccer gal, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. So then I was working on trying to, as I was finishing my PhD, still kind of had the goal of working in the Premier League in England. And so I was applying to jobs and having some luck, but still needed a little bit more time. So to buy myself a little bit of time, as well as have a chance to go work with some really cool researchers, I went and did a postdoc in Mentorship in Sweden.
Awesome.
We got the chance to work with
that. That's really cool.
Not only live in Sweden, which was amazing, but work with some just amazing people. And then had actually secured a job in a Premier League academy, but at the very last minute, my visa was rejected. And so kind of got sent back to the drawing board. And one of my mentors, who's actually based in London, but has done consulting for both the San Antonio Spurs and the Nets, new position was coming open with the Nets, and kind of his words were, well, "What do you think about the NBA?" And my response was like, "I need a job right now." I'm not being picky. So I had a few other options, but and I actually didn't get the job that I'd interviewed for at the Nets, but they actually created a position for me, kind of based on my skill set, what they felt like I could bring, felt that I'd be valuable. So they actually started as a contractor, and then they've brought me on full time. So that's my adventure to the Nets.
That's such an interesting story, and I'm very curious on a couple of things about that. But one, just like staying true to like what your passion was throughout like your whole life, and also, like we kind of touched base earlier when Lindsay made the comment of, not only looking at working towards your career and working towards your goals, but taking time to also enjoy some things in life a little bit with your kind of gap year. And also, I'm sure you got a little life experience living in Sweden as well. So I'm sure that was amazing.
Yeah.
What was it like to shift from, kind of this like soccer to all of a sudden like NBA male basketball? Was that something that was challenging for you, or can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, so they're a lot bigger.
Yes.
Accurate.
The easiest and most obvious. No, I think it's been a really fun challenge, and I think it's been really good for me. Really good clinically. I think a good example is, in soccer, I can put my cleats on, go out on a field, and I can take an athlete through, field-based session. I know what movements are part of soccer. I kind of know how to break those movements down. I know how to coach them. I don't have that ability in basketball. Not only am I just shy of 5'6", but I just don't have those skills. So I can't go up against a 6'8" NBA player, and they can shoot right over my head quite easily. So suddenly I've had to learn a new sport entirely. I've had to learn the movements that are kind of key to it. I had to learn how to break those down but then also learn to build them back up and not necessarily coach them, but help other people coach them. So, collaborate with coaches to say, here's some of the movements that we really need to get. How do we get those into a session? What drills can you come up where are would be good to do this? And so that's been a really good and I think a really fun challenge in having to uh, expand my background, but also expand how I work with athletes and work with coaches, and really kind of collaborate to get an athlete what they need. So I think it's kind of been it's been an adventure that we all kind of have, because a lot of us at the Nets come from different sports. It's one of the things that when they put our performance department together, they actually looked for was really diversity in backgrounds. So I think it's been a learning experience for all of us, but also I think a really good challenge that I really appreciate. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think one, I love that the Nets as an organization, like you just mentioned, kind of looked to bringing people onto their team that weren't necessarily like ballers. I think sorry, cheesy. I think having a perspective from a totally different sport creates this like, I don't know, more hunger to like learn what you're getting into. And it creates this like really fresh perspective on a team. So I think that's a really cool component of what your guys' organization is doing. And kind of taking a step back a little bit, what do you feel like kind of helped to set you apart to get into that role? Because you said they kind of made a contracting position for you.
Yeah, so I think some of the things that I think were appealing to my background was having having research experience. So not only being able to come in and potentially help clinically, but also since my background's kind of in movement and prevention, as well as having that research experience. I think those were things that were kind of unique that they thought were valuable in bringing me in. So kind of having someone who could kind of bridge between sports science and maybe the more science evidence based side of things and the clinical side, and be able to kind of translate back and forth was something I think they really valued and thought I could bring. So
definitely. And I definitely think that perspective, kind of like Jackie touched on too, and like you touched on, holds a really like unique value to not just the athlete, but to movement and like breaking down their movement and then having to coach them through or teach someone else how to coach them through something maybe a little different that you're slightly tweaking. So I think that's really awesome for our listeners to hear too, how your different experiences have built up to this position. And even kind of in the beginning, it wasn't really your big goal to get into the NBA per se, but you still ended up in professional sports. So I think that's awesome. So going back a little bit to what you touched on with communication, and having to communicate with different individuals, not only like in the sports med team, but someone else who's going against them, or maybe having to coach them through a new movement. Can you talk about or touch on when you first started, how you did that? Because it's probably not easy for a sport you're not used to playing or going through yourself to then have to coach someone or cue someone to something new. So what do you feel like kind of helped you learn how to do that better?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was asking a lot of questions.
Got it. Yeah.
Asking questions and being as observant as I could. So from the get-go, trying to build relationships with everyone around me. So not just within the performance team, but trying to build relationships with coaches, trying to get to know them, and picking their brains as well. And that's something that I'm still working on and still building. But making sure that it's not just the other PTs that I work with, but that I work that I'm got good relationships and good communication with our sports science and S&C coaches, with really everybody on our performance team, but then also with those coaches. And so, especially in learning basketball, asking them a lot of questions and saying, all right, so this is what I see. What do you call this? Or what do you like? What does this play? What does this mean? Here's what it is in soccer. What is it in basketball?
Yeah.
And I'll preface questions like, this is going to be a really dumb question, or this is going to be an ignorant question. And I'll ask players too. I would be like, all right, this is a dumb question, but
yeah.
what is this? Or do you do this? Things like that. So I think it's just been asking questions, and trying to observe. One of our players the other day was like, all right, so here's watch this and tell me what the pattern is.
That's great. Pop quiz.
All right, let me see what I can come up with. And he's like, I got close. I didn't exactly know the pattern, but he was like, yeah, no, this is what I'm doing. So, having that kind of relationship, I think has been really, really helpful for me understanding, and learning. And I still have a ton to understand and learn for sure. But yeah.
No, I think, I appreciate, and I know our listeners do too, I appreciate your honesty. And I love that you touched on, one, the importance of asking questions when you maybe just don't know something, but then also the importance of nomenclature and kind of calling things, whatever, movements, exercises, etc., the same thing, because I think that is a huge, and this is a completely other tangent, but this is a huge issue in the physical therapy, athletic training, strength and conditioning world. We do similar things, but we call it something different. But I love that you touched on that, and that your player just gave you a pop quiz.
yeah. And I think it's easy for I've had this discussion with a few coaches, is that coaching, especially in basketball, there isn't a lot of coaching education. And so if I come out on court and say, hey, this is the movement I want this guy to get, they go, I don't know what you mean. It can be kind of intimidating in some ways, for me to kind of approach it as from a clinical standpoint. Whereas if I kind of understand a little bit more, and can put it in a little bit more of that basketball nomenclature, I can frame it a little bit better within basketball. It becomes a little less intimidating might not be the right word, but a little more approachable and easy to understand and easy to translate. So yeah, having kind of a common language across disciplines, I think kind of helps break down some barriers, as well as just make communication a lot more easy.
So kind of going off of that, you kind of mentioned maybe a challenge from coach to you, and maybe understanding some of the things that you're kind of coming to them with. Can you speak to maybe some challenges? And this doesn't just have to be in the NBA, this can be through your entire career. Any challenges that kind of came your way as you were working your progress towards, at the time, soccer, but really professional sports, and what you kind of did to work yourself through those things, whether it be some, positive self-talk or whatever, or, chatting with your mentors? What sorts of things can you speak to in that way?
Yeah. I mean, I think, having mentors has been really valuable for me, really at all, pretty much every point throughout my career. And I'd say one of the things too that is also not just one in one area, but kind of multiple mentors who I can kind of go to for various different things. So I had a really good, still have, I still consider him one of my mentors. Have a really good relationship with my first like CI. And so he's someone who both helped facilitate my first job. I ended up going to work for his best friend. And the both of them have been kind of clinical mentors to me pretty significantly. So they're people that, if I get stuck, that I know I can call and be like, hey, here's some context. What do you think? Or, just ask them, kind of maybe more clinical related questions. I'll ask them life questions too. I've one of my first mentors is a guy named Joe Black, who I met through going to combined sections meetings. He's kind of been more of a professional mentor, sometimes clinical, but more, I'd say maybe more of a professional and kind of life mentor in a lot of ways. So there's been times where, situations related to my job have come up and I've kind of gone to him to say, hey, what do you think? Or what advice do you have? He's got a lot of experience running clinics and kind of management, as well as kind of leadership within the ABTA and the TPTA. And so from those perspectives, he's someone who I've gone to. So I think having people kind of from various phases of my life, but also kind of even though they're all kind of professional mentors, kind of within various aspects of my profession, I think has been really valuable. And they're people that I, even though, may not have seen for a while, will still connect back to on a regular basis as things come up. So, in terms of specific challenges, struggling to come up with one specific one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's whether it's there's every job's going to have them. Every position's going to have them. Whether that's working with people around you, or the job itself, or just the wider context of what's going on in your life. I think there's always things that happen. Nothing's ever super smooth for forever, but I think, yeah, it's even just taking on quarantine, being able to manage manage your own personal stress or anxiety of kind of being cooped up in the house or an apartment. Maybe it's with someone, or maybe it's not with someone. Both of those, I think, come with their own adventures as well, and challenges and good aspects. So whether that's managing stress of internally and as well as externally, personally and professionally, I think there's always a balancing act.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things here. One, the difficulty in finding one specific obstacle, I think also speaks to those obstacles eventually end up just kind of being a part of your life. And you don't always remember in 15 years, 8 years ago, there was this one conversation I had and it went really badly. I think it more speaks to the obstacles we overcome, and they're an obstacle maybe in that moment, but having your mentors and having your colleagues to help you grow in multiple ways, I think, is that kind of next step to push you past those things. I think another thing to kind of comment on is I think a lot of people, when they hear this question or when we ask this question, expect to hear obstacles specific to your career. But what you were kind of bringing up is just life. And I think what happens in our life affects significantly what we're doing in our career. So I think,
sure.
Having, like you were saying earlier, those people that are going to mentor you not only in your career, in your craft, but in professional networking and growth, and just someone to be hey, I'm having a crappy day. How do I not let that integrate into my care? So I think you brought up, even though maybe not bringing up a specific one, I think the general story of that was really beneficial to our listeners.
Yeah, most definitely. I'd have to agree with what Jackie said. That being said, it sounds like you've had a lot of different mentors give you some pretty good, again, not just career advice, life advice. What are maybe like 1 to 2 or even 3 pieces of advice you might give to an up and coming person who wants to be in the position you're in?
Yeah, I think one that my PhD advisor, Lynn Snyder Mackler, goes back to quite frequently, and I've heard Sharon Dunn, the president of the APTA, also give it. So I don't know who to give credit to. I just give credit to both of them. Is their analogy is that kind of life in general is a juggling act, and you've got, as you're juggling, you've got crystal balls and you've got rubber balls. Yeah. And so those crystal balls are those things that are like really, really important to you. They have to be kept in the air because if they fall, they break. So whether they're family or self-care or whatever that is to you, those crystal balls are the ones that you have to keep in the air. You have to really pay attention to. The rubber balls are important things, but they're things that if they drop, they bounce. And so those rubber balls may change depending on kind of what's going on in the situation. But that it's okay to sometimes let them bounce, sometimes let them go. And so I think that's a really good analogy that I come back to. I feel like was really valuable for framing kind of life in general, or particularly my professional life, is that there are things that you have to take care of, and that you can't really sacrifice. If you do, it's really kind of sacrificing yourself, and it's going to be at the detriment to a lot of things. Dropping one of those crystal balls is going to be problematic, but that there are also then things that can be, you're not necessarily forever getting rid of them, but they might come in and out of importance. So I think that's probably been one of the big pieces that I don't always remember. I should always remember, but because it is very easy to kind of get tunnel vision and to get focused in the kind of day to day and the minutia. But from that like 50,000 point view, that's really, I think, something that's been helpful for me.
Yeah. I think saying that's a good analogy is an understatement. That's a great analogy. And I think comes back to your perspective on things. Like you touched on, it's easy to get tunnel vision, and the next thing you know, something that might be a glass ball has fallen and it's broken. And unfortunately, it gets to the point when it's broken, you don't realize how much you weren't keeping it up in the air, I guess you could say. So I think that's a great analogy. And I think all our listeners should go back and re-listen to that and really think on it for a minute, and then go analyze their balls and then go from there. But no, I appreciate that advice, because I think that's amazing. And again, it touches on like not just your career, like life, how everything works together and is important. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it ties in, Jackie, how you summarized it earlier, in that like day to day, it's easy to get caught up into, what's going on, or a particular challenge or issue. And it feels like that's your world. Like it's hard. And I struggle with it sometimes. It's hard to get out of that taking over kind of your entire thought process. But when you can take that step back, and when you can kind of get out of that cycle, to be able to see it in a wider context, or get a little distance from it, whether that just be time or actually like maybe physical distance from it, to be able to see it and put it in context, it makes it a little easier to handle. And but certainly makes it that growth opportunity that you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, like Lindsay said, I think that analogy is great. I think what else also is nice about it is sometimes the advice we get from people is like a little bit more on the abstract sort of way. And I think as humans, like the more abstract things we have, the more difficult it is to make an actionable step to like figure it out. So I like that just in the sense that it's like something concrete that like I can sit down with and say like, all right, like what's my glass and what's my rubber, and what do I need to make sure that I'm touching base with on a regular basis to make sure I'm not dropping the ball. So overall, I think that's great just in that sense, giving something external for us to focus on, because I think when we're in the moment of struggle or challenge, it's hard to like really like hone in on something that's abstract. So I love that analogy. And then to kind of end on a lighter note, you had a crazy amount of amazing experience, and I'm sure we only touched into like just a glimpse of it. But throughout your experience, what is one of the like funniest or most interesting moments that you kind of had in your experience?
So I was thinking about this, and actually, I was talking to a PT student yesterday, and he asked me if I get starstruck. And I think it's an advantage of working in basketball. Coming from soccer, working in basketball is, coming into basketball, I knew really like the really big names, and I knew basketball roughly, but most players I didn't know, and there's only been a few instances where I have gotten, say, like really starstruck. One was being in the same room as Arsene Wenger, who's the former head coach of Arsenal. And I grew up an Arsenal fan. So
there you go.
Yeah. So I didn't even have the chance to talk to him. But just being in the same room,
just stared at him from afar.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But he asked me if I got starstruck. So that was one. And then I was like, no, not really, because on an everyday basis, our players they're human beings. They're normal people. And the training room is a safe space for them. So everybody's just a person. But then I was thinking about it, and I realized there is actually another case where I did get starstruck. Ironically, it was on my interview at Brooklyn. And
not a great time to like be struck by something.
Yeah. So growing up in Alaska, Trajan Langdon he grew up in the Anchorage area, went and played at Duke, and then played in the NBA, as well as then had a significant career in Europe. And for me, Trajan's older than I am, but for really my generation of people growing up in Alaska, Trajan was this massive example of one of the first athletes to really make it out of Alaska, be really successful, kind of make it onto the national stage growing up in Alaska. And he was a big deal. I hadn't really thought much about Trajan, really probably in years. He'd come up once in a while at Duke, as the Alaskan assassin.
There you love it.
Trajan was actually the assistant GM at Brooklyn for a few years. And so when I interviewed, Trajan was still at Brooklyn. And so the first day of my interview was actually a game day. The second day I was at the training facility. So my first day, I hung out, essentially kind of interviewed with a few people, spent some time as they were doing game prep. And then I sat with the front office during the game. And during the first half of the game, I sat next to Trajan Langdon.
Were you quiet, or did you like?
Well, we had a great conversation. Trajan is awesome. I love Trajan. He's such a great guy. But we got to talking. We were talking about all sorts of stuff. And then he asked me where I grew up, and so I said I grew up in Alaska. And he's like, oh, where'd you go? And I went to West Valley for high school. He's like, well, where I grew up with, right? And I was like, no. I'm like, in my head, I was like, of course I know exactly where you grew up. Like,
play cool,
I know,
play cool.
We looked up, I looked up to you. And he's like, oh, yeah, like I'm from Anchorage. And I was like, oh,
oh my gosh, I had no idea.
In my head, I was like, I know. I don't know why I just said that. Like, I honestly don't know this. And so I ended up, as they worked out all my contract deals, and I signed for Brooklyn. And on my like kind of first week that I was in, I ran into Trajan again, and I had to like pull him aside. I was like, all right, Trajan, here's the deal. I knew exactly who you were and where you grew up. I just, in the moment, blanked. Yeah. He laughed. He got a huge kick out of it. He's like,
that's great.
Yeah, I don't know why you would have gotten starstruck by me, but I was like, well, there you go. I did.
Oh.
That's a really relatable moment though, because like so many times we meet people in our life that it doesn't have to be like a star or celebrity. It's like someone in your career that you're really excited to meet, or some like a neighborhood hero sort of thing, and you're just like, I have no clue to this. I know exactly what I'm saying, and you're better than me. I would have just ran with it and been like, yeah, I don't know why I didn't know me. Such a good
story. And I think it's like one of those, like, you get it, it's your brain just like loses things. You're like, think of a question. Well, I can't think of any questions. And 20 minutes later you've got a 900 questions, but in the moment, because you said think of a question, your brain's like, nope.
So funny. Well,
great.
Amy, thank you so much for hanging out with us today on a Sunday. And I'm really excited to see, the NBA hopefully come back in some sort of way soon. But thank you for sharing everything that you shared.
Thank you for listening to the Women Leaders in Sports Medicine podcast.
Awesome.
This podcast is for you to take a step closer to your dreams. Visit www.womenleadersinsportsmedicine.com to join our roundtables, learn about our mentorship programs, and to let us know what you want to hear. Have a great day, and remember, it's your time to lead.